On this episode of TWiP, it's all about Fuji and Canon. And Canon has gone full frame mirrorless.
This is TWiP.
All right, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo. I'm your host, Frederick Van Johnson. Joining me today on the show are two lucky gentlemen. I've got my friend, Mr. Jeff Cable here, and also Stephen Scharf. And we're going to have both of them kind of introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Stephen. Stephen, you are one of our TWiP Pro members, but you happen to have a mountain of knowledge around Fuji and, well, lots of stuff. Motorsports, Fuji, DNA, all that kind of stuff. So give us the 30-second Stephen Scharf elevator pitch so we can kind of get an idea of who you are.
Sure. Thanks, Frederick. My name's Stephen Scharf, and a longtime photographer, currently a motorsports photojournalist for Sonoma Raceway, and I just retired last December as a molecular biologist and quality professional in biotech, and have since become very active on Frederick's TWiP Pro network, thanks to Frederick's leadership.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. And I know you're saying leadership tongue in cheek, right? So like Lord of the Flies kind of leadership. And also the show is my friend Jeff Cable. Jeff, I've known you for many, many years. You are literally the Olympic shooter. You traveled to the Olympics and have shot it more times than I can remember, and you are a in the front lines normal day-to-day shooter as well. Tell us a little bit about Jeff Cable.
I am not a molecular biologist. That was pretty aggressive. I'm like, how do I follow that? Let's see. I've shot the last 6 Olympics for Team USA. I am a full-time photographer. Actually, also spent many years not doing photography, but in the corporate world, as you know, when I met you, when we were both about 20.
Yeah, I was 15.
And yeah, so I do the Olympics. I also shoot a lot of events here in the Bay Area. I teach workshops to spend 5 weeks in Africa and another 10 days in Costa Rica. So a little bit of everything. I'm one of those weird photographers that doesn't really specialize in one thing and just loves photography in general. So
I love it.
And I write the blog. So the blog is my weekly passion as well.
Yeah. Where's your blog at? Just so people know.
Just blog.jeffcable.com.
Blog.jeffcable.com.
And wrote a blog this morning all about the topic we're about to speak about.
Great.
Awesome. Cool. Well, let's dive into that topic that we're about to speak about. And there's 2 main topics that I want to cover. The first topic, obviously, well, they're both equally important, I think. But the first one I want to cover is Fuji. So I want to jump over to you, Stephen, and talk a little bit about that. So Fuji, we talk a lot about Fuji. In fact, we did a show a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about that whole Fuji look. And is that a thing, right? The Fuji look and the Leica look and all that stuff, are those real things or are they imagined? Turns out it may be a little bit of both, but what I've sort of discerned over the past couple of months or year or so is that people that love Fuji, and that includes folks like you, Stephen, my friend Valerie Jardin, and the list goes on and on. Zach Arias, all these people love Fuji. So, and now Fuji has come out with yet another baby. So, Stephen, you've done some research on this camera. Give us a little update about what Fuji has released and why it might be important to us, and then we'll kind of dive into some discussion about it.
That sounds great. So Fuji just announced yesterday about 10 p.m. Pacific time, the new XT3 mirrorless APS-C camera. And it's very similar in design. It's almost identical to the previous model XT2, which is a retro-inspired camera. It looks like an old-fashioned SLR with analog controls on the camera for shutter speed and ISO and exposure compensation, and aperture rings on the lenses. So very much like the film cameras of old. And I would say that that's one of the reasons why Fuji has such a passionate group of followers is that a lot of folks like myself and Val and yourself, Frederick, and I'm sure Jeff as well, started out on film cameras, and they all had analog controls, and that appeals, I think, to a lot of folks. Kind of takes them back to their days when they started photography, and there's a lot of appeal in kind of that tactile analog way of controlling, a simple, clear way of controlling a camera. So Fuji understood that the X-T2 was a big hit for them in terms of both the sales and acceptance by their customer base, and they changed basically the overall design of the camera very little. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the refinements they did. They always do some refinements, but the big enhancements to the X-T3 compared to the X-T2 are really just, for the most part, notable performance upgrades. So there's a newer sensor that's slightly higher in resolution. There's a new image processing engine, the fourth version, which is about 3 times faster than the old version. And this enables significantly increased autofocus performance and also improves the dynamic range somewhat, as well as lowering the noise performance, the standard things you get with improved sensors. And now one of the big deals is the camera now has pretty significantly improved video functionality. So it's now got in-camera 4K 60p video, 10-bit with 420 subsampling. And a lot of folks are excited about that. So it looks like it's going to be a notable performance increase over the X-T2, while keeping a lot of the flavor and the design and control aspects of the X-T2 that people really loved.
Now, Stephen, in your experience with Fuji, are they a company that, and I know I'm answering my own question as I ask this, but are they a company that sort of culls all the user feedback, and then you as a user, you see that incorporated into their next release? Or are they more like an Apple, where they hey, we know this stuff better than you do, and we're going to give you what you didn't know you needed? What do you think?
It's primarily the first that you were talking about. As you know, Frederick, in my corporate career, I taught voice of the customer as a way to develop products. Mm-hmm. And actually, when I was teaching classes in my old day job, I used to use Fujifilm as a reference of a company that really understood voice of the customer really well. So they do have a very active network of official X-photographers that they fly into Japan or meet with on a regular basis. And they solicit a lot of input from those photographers about their needs. Yeah. And typically, the input that they're always asking for is, how can we make the cameras better for you? So they're certainly interested in hearing the feedback that they get that's positive, but they really want to continually improve the camera's performance and better meet their customer needs. So they're very proactive in that respect.
That's good.
And then I would say, in terms of the other thing that their customers love about them, that they're well known for, is releasing firmware updates on a very regular basis. And I would say that they certainly take some input from their customer base on the nature of those, but a lot of times they have an internal set of requirements that they're using to kind of to add functionality and features and to fix occasional bugs by doing firmware updates. For example, with the X-T3, they're going to add hybrid log gamma before 8 years end to the feature set before the end of the year via a firmware update.
And I want to dive into that stuff a little bit deeper as we sort of walk through the tentpole features of this release.
Sure.
Jeff Cable, you've been shooting Canon for a while now, right? And you're intimate with the line. You love Canon. You've forsaken all others for Canon. I think your camera has a ring on it or something. Right? So when you saw this, I mean, we on this week in photo, we've been sort of bashing Canon and Nikon, to be fair, over the years for not coming out with a full frame mirrorless. Now they've announced at least a full frame mirrorless. Is this the camera that all you Canon people have been waiting for, or is this a step in the right direction at least?
Well, I think it's a step in the right direction. They, I wrote a blog this morning about it because I looked at the specs. I'll see it in a couple days and get to play with it.
Cool.
But right now, I mean, looking at the specs and talking to my friends at Canon, what I see it as a right step. And so, I don't see it as like people always ask me, are you going to go mirrorless, and it's not. It's not something for me yet. And I think, like I said in the blog, there's some really cool stuff that they did with it. I really like what they've done with the control ring on the lens. I think it's great that they've finally come out with a full frame mirrorless. I've got, they've sent me the M3 and some different mirrorless in the past, and I didn't really use them much. I'm used to the 1DX Mark II and the 5D Mark IV and 5D Mark III before that, and so forth. And so for me, the mirrorless hasn't hit the mark. This is way closer to hitting the mark. Is it everything we needed as a pro shooter? It's not, and that's what I put in my blog today. So even though I love Canon and I use Canon, my blog has always been, I always want to be truthful, and I don't want to be one of those people that just says everything from Canon is great,
right?
Because I think it's a good camera for the enthusiast. But I think for the pro, some things that it just doesn't, like the fact that both the Nikon and the Canon only have one memory card slot. That to me is a deal breaker, because I'm shooting, as events here in the Bay Area for some very high profile clients. And I can't rely on one card. I've been in the memory card business, as you know, for a long time.
Yeah.
Or I was for 12 years. I know way too much about memory cards that most people don't want to know. So
how the sausage is made, right?
Yeah, it's not pretty. And so I even though I use great quality product, I don't want to trust it to one card. And having like battery life that lasts for 400 images, which might sound great to a consumer, but 400 images to me at the Olympics, that's what, 2 minutes, like 5 minutes worth. I think we're blasting out shots. So there's a lot of things where it doesn't meet my needs yet. But I'm happy, because I think what it sets is it sets a tone that Canon's listening, and that hopefully, before the Summer Olympics in Tokyo, they'll have come out with something that hopefully addresses all these and hits the pro market.
And that's what I want to talk about a little bit before. That's part of the discussion that I want to hit, and it's around is the release of this camera, because the Fuji camera, the XT3, and this camera are worlds apart. In a lot of ways, they both do similar things. Obviously, record images, but in terms of their customer base and the target market, probably maybe some overlap, but different. So Jeff, I wanted to continue with you on your side. So I wanted you to give us the sort of the rundown for the Canon people that are watching, and they're like, what is it about this camera that makes it special and should make me want to consider buying one, or side grading or upgrading to one? What are the tentpole sort of marketing flyer features?
Well, and I don't want to go by their marketing, right? Sure. I mean, because that's just drinking the Kool-Aid. I think their marketing will do what they're going to do. To me, the big thing is it uses the same sensors as a 5D Mark IV. That's pretty impressive, because it's a great camera. I use it all the time, and I love that. Well, something I've wanted from Canon for a long time is the focal point, unlimited focal points across the frame. Mm-hmm. So, having the 5,000 focal points is really cool, because I'd love to be able to move that dot wherever I want. I don't want to be constricted to a grid. I want to just be able to move the dot and focus wherever I want. And I think that's cool. I've not tried it yet, and I don't know if that works with AI servo. And I was like, for the Olympics type shooting, where I need follow focus to be very accurate and very fast, I've yet to try that. So that'll be interesting. Yeah. Clearly the smaller size and weight is really important. I mean, it's, for those of us who do travel to Africa, twice a year, and Costa Rica 2 or 3 times a year, it'd be nice to have less gear to take, or at least lighter weight. So that's kind of cool. Yeah. As I mentioned, the control ring, the way that they've kind of done some cool customization on that control ring that you can have on the lens, or even on the lens adapter, is interesting, that you can customize it to be whatever you want. I think that's pretty neat. The lighter weight lenses, until I try them, sound great in spec, but again, I mean, it's rebuying lenses, which most of us don't want to do. I think, overall, and of course, the ability to shoot silently, for your shooting, it won't really matter if you're shooting in motorsports, but, where it's so dang loud. But for shooting, golf, or shooting inside of temples or churches is really important. So those are the good parts. Yeah. And in the flip side, and I think for the prosumer or the enthusiast, it could be a very good choice. So I'm not bashing it on the blog. I'm just saying, like, for me personally, it's not going to work yet. Yeah. But I think that there's a lot of really interesting things they've done. And again, I think this is the scratching the surface, and I think that Canon will address the pro market.
That's what I wanted to talk about, because I've heard that before. That people would say, yeah, they're scratching the surface, or this is a good first effort. But then I push back and say, I agree on one hand, but on the other hand, there are folks out there like Panasonic with Lumix, which is what I shoot. There's Sony with their full frame wire or mirrorless, and of course, Fuji's out there in the game making waves and creating legions of fans all the time. And arguably, the mirrorless market is mature. Like some of the things you mentioned, Jeff, like the silent shooting. We've been doing that for a long time, so that's not new. There's all the weight factor. Yeah, that's what drew a lot of people into mirrorless to begin with, is the size and the weight and the portability of these cameras. So I'm wondering if Canon, if a company like Canon, I feel like they probably have more money than I do, right? So they have a lot of money, a lot of resources, and motivation, because everyone's watching the Canon out there, right? So it seems like they would look at like a Sony and say, you know what, everyone likes that. Let's do that, but put our spin on it, or something like that. What do you agree, or am I off base here?
I do agree, and I do agree with you, and I think that that's where they're going. I like you. I am surprised it's taken them this long. I mean, I think that Sony has, and I said this a year ago. I said, I love Canon products. I shoot with them all the time, but it seems like Sony was out innovating everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes to the detriment. I mean, they come out with new cameras like every 2 days, 3 days. It's like it's
10
kind of
minutes.
like their cycle is ridiculous, but which creates some buyer remorse issues. If I was, you hate to buy a camera and then have 3 more come out next week. So maybe a little too fast, but they are innovating. And like the A9, I think is if you look at the A9 on specs, it is incredible. I went and played with the A9 and I was less than, it brought me back down to reality. I think that the feel of the camera, the menu system, the quality of the screen, if you will, and you're looking through the eyepiece, a lot of it left something to be desired.
Yeah.
And so on specs, you look at it and go like, this is the holy grail of photography. But I think Canon, so yes, could Canon move faster? I think they could. What I'm hoping is that they're using this as a first step, and that hopefully they'll address it. I put on my blog, here's all the things I want them to do to make this a pro product, like weather sealing. It's not weather sealed like the 1DX Mark II or even the 5D Mark IV. And when you go into the rainforest and shooting, you need to have some weather sealing. So I put my wish list in: 2 memory card slots, more than 8 frames a second, all these things. Better battery life, or at least 2 batteries or something to address that.
Jeff, you're describing a different camera completely, right? So you're just saying,
I am.
I don't want that one. Make me one that make me a pro version of that non-weather sealed version, one memory card slot thing that you made. Make me a pro version of that, and then we'll talk, right?
And I am saying that. I mean, I'm saying, this is a good camera. I think it's a good first step for Canon in the prosumer market.
Yeah.
But for the pro market, and I'll say this even for the A9, they have some of the same issues. Like, I mean, battery life is not near enough. I mean, I generally shoot thousands of images on a battery, so I'm not used to shooting 400. So and of course, when you make a camera that small, you can't have a giant battery, right? Right. And so, I'm used to this. And of course, this is the size of a mirrorless camera.
Let the record show, for those that are listening to the audio version, that Jeff pulled out his Canon. What is that? EOS
The
what?
1DX Mark II.
The 1DX Mark II, also known as a Sherman tank with a car battery in it.
It is. And the thing is, I can beat the living daylights out of this camera and have. I've actually fallen off a waterfall and dropped the thing, and it is a Sherman tank.
Yeah.
But so, and some would argue you can't have it all. And so, the list that I put on my blog of what I'd like to see is maybe a little bit pie in the sky, but at the same time, some of those are absolutely critical, like having 2 memory card slots and having a little bit better battery life.
All right.
And so I think that, but again, I think they're getting there. Could they move faster? Yes. Could they? And I think what Nikon's doing the same thing. I think both Nikon and Canon are playing catch up for sure.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. That's a good segue. And Stephen, you're not off the hook yet. I still have some questions for you on this Fuji side of things. Completely different tangent on that side. But Jeff, on you mentioned that Canon and Nikon aren't off the hook in terms of coming out with this camera. Along those lines, looking at Sony and the lead that Sony has and the fans that they're making, I'm seeing 2 things, and not that I'm some authority, but what I see from my little consumer perch is with Nikon and Canon finally making movement, people are either, it seems like people that I talk to are either saying, you know what, I'm going to sit tight and keep my lenses now. I'm not going to buy any other systems like Sony because these guys aren't asleep. They're actually doing something.
Right.
But on the other hand, I'm seeing a lot of used Sony gear show up online. Like our friend, Troy Miller on the show has put his stuff up online and has bought 2 of the Nikon cameras, mirrorless, the Nikon Z cameras. He's purchased 2 of them. So to make a long question shorter, is it too late for a company like Canon to be entering this space? Do the other guys have a big lead?
No, I think, going back to what you said before about, they've got a little bit more money than you do. And I haven't seen your bank account. Give me your password later. Trust me, Canon and Nikon still have, the marketing power and the money behind them to come back and address this. And I think, if you look at history, even when someone else does innovate, like Sony has done, Canon and Nikon can come back and eat Sony's lunch, or at least make an attempt at that. So I think that I don't think they're out of the game by any stretch. And I think that this, at least the one thing I like about Nikon's announcement and Canon's announcement, is they're saying, we're not going to let Sony continue this. Mm-hmm. We're going to join this race. And that's what I put in the blog. Like, they're in the race.
Yeah.
Are they winning the race? No, they're not winning the race. But now what they're saying is, look, we're putting the car in the race. We're going to fine tune this engine, and we're going to win the race eventually. And I think that there's a chance of that.
Yeah.
So I think it makes people at least think twice about, do I jump to Sony or not, or do I, switch cameras? And switching cameras is not for the faint of heart, because selling your gear that you're used to can be a pain in the butt and cost you a lot of money.
Yeah.
And switching menu systems and all that, which arguably, looking at the EOS R, it's a very different menu system than what I'm used to, which is something I didn't put in the blog, but something I just thought about just now, which is, man, that's a big change.
Yeah.
And as a photographer, you have to be intimately knowledgeable of your camera, because when Phelps is swimming in the pool, you can't tell him to stop and wait, right?
Yeah. Let me dig and find this menu item that I was looking for, right?
Yeah.
Frederick, can I add just a comment to what Jeff is saying?
Yes, please, go ahead.
So Jeff, you should know, I've been doing professionally accredited motorsports for 15 years now. And until 2016, I shot with a Canon 1D series body that whole time. And L lenses, and that system is, superbly designed to do what it does really well. It's extremely rugged. But for me, I think that where the Canon has appeal, and I think you spoke to this in some manner, is that it's not just about specs and throwing everything in the kitchen sink. It's about things like durability, build quality, and for me, it's handling. And when I shot with an A9, I'll be honest with you, my fingers were seriously pinched between the lens barrel and the grip.
Exactly.
The mechanical shutter was very noisy and clunky and loud. I wasn't crazy about the EVF. And so for me, if I'm like you, and I'm a photojournalist and I'm working day in and day out covering a lot of sports, the durability and the handling of the camera are kind of top requirements for me.
Yeah.
And, I think what I like from a review that I saw of the EOS R is that the ergos are really good on the camera. And that means that it's, photographers that adopt that camera will have a slightly larger body. They'll be able to actually use the lenses that they have. The EOS line of lenses are superb. There's no denying. And they'll be able to get on with, use cases where that camera will be a fit. And they'll be able to actually use the camera in the real world, which I think is an important consideration.
Yeah. Right. I wonder for both of you guys, I wonder if is there validity to the idea that Sony has been in some ways acting as R&D for Nikon and Canon, right? So, I mean, just looking at numbers of the Sony, DI group, the digital imaging group, versus the sheer size of the Nikon behemoth and the Canon behemoth, Sony's winning the race, but they could be a group within one of these other companies. And if these other companies wake up and say, you know what, let's throw a couple billion at that thing right there, could they just look at a Sony and say, yeah, thanks for all the testing and bearing out the mirrorless market for us. Now we'll take it from here. Right?
I think that's what they're doing. I mean, I think that's what they're trying to do, right?
So.
I think that they're saying, okay, granted, you have Olympus, who, frankly is, surprising to still be around. I mean, after what they went through, tough times.
Mm-hmm.
You have Fuji, who's small. You've got, Pentax, and all these guys that are small that, arguably Canon and Nikon could eat their lunch. Sony is probably bigger than that and has made a big push. They've also made a huge push to try to get Olympic photographers using their product. So for a lot of reasons. For one, they're trying to get into the press center of the Olympics, and in order to do so, they have to have a certain percentage. So they're working hard at that. But sure, Canon and Nikon are saying, okay, this is all nice and cute. You've proven that there's an interest.
Yeah.
I think for sure that they're going to gun hard at it.
Yeah. Now, Stephen Scharf, I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about, or a lot about Fuji. And
sure,
like I alluded to at the beginning of the show, there's this to quote Alan Greenspan from years gone by, there's this irrational exuberance around Fuji. Like, we know where that ended, right? there's this irrational exuberance around Fuji and the brand, and it's warranted. I mean, I'm testing the X100F here, and I understand the quality of the camera, and you were talking about the mechanics and the harkening back to old school cameras and all that. But I have a sort of a 2-point question for you. On the one hand, if we look at Fuji cameras and we say, part of the allure of the Fuji brand and the Fuji cameras like the new XT3 are that they look old school, the rush of people that are coming into photography aren't old school, right? So these are people that are like, and I'm going to take all my shots with my phone, and then maybe I'll upgrade to something better when I need it. They're not nostalgic about silver and black cameras and knobs and dials and all that stuff for the most part. Maybe some are, I'm generalizing. But first of all, what do you say to that? I mean, are we looking at a matter of attrition in terms of people that like that nostalgic look, or is it here to stay?
Well, I think I think that there's different segments of customers, right? That type of camera design appeals to, and certainly, coming from the Canon world for many, many years, there was a pretty big change to kind of go back to this more slightly older school design. I will say that the cameras are beautifully integrated in terms of the functionality that you can set, as you know, Frederick, shooting with an X100F the last few weeks, in terms of being able to pick up the camera, know what it's set at, and start using it right away. And I'm using it now. Been using the XT2 since 2016 for my motorsports photojournalism work. I find the camera seamless in use. It's fast. It's responsive. From everything I've seen so far in the research that I did last night, the XT3 is an order of magnitude above that in terms of responsiveness and autofocus performance, and the video performance looks to be really, really good as well. Mm-hmm. But to kind of get to where you were kind of leading with your question, what's really interesting, and I say this because I was selling a lot of my Canon gear at the end of last year, because I kind of, and the reason I moved away from it, Frederick, like you mentioned, is, I'm getting on in years now, and I can't haul that stuff around on my back anymore.
We all are, my friend. I'm telling you.
I carried that gear around at Laguna Seca and Sonoma Raceway, up and down those hills all those years. 500 300 2.8s, 7200 2.8s, 1Ds, and it just wore me out. And so
you should have one of the marketing bullets should be free curvature of the spine with every purchase.
Actually, they should do a bundle deal between the camera companies and your chiropractor and massage therapist. Because I seriously I go to I've gone to both, because it is hard. I mean, this is a tough business, and for those people who out there who think, I want to be like Stephen and be a motorsports photographer, right. And it's cool, it's fun to do, and do the Olympics is great, but and shooting events is really fun. But I tell you what, like I play ice hockey every week, and I get more sore shooting than I do playing hockey. It is, you're contorting, you're carrying all the gear.
It's backwards.
It's hard.
It's really hard. People don't understand. But where I wanted to answer Frederick's question, is this kind of a passing phase, for maybe certain age group or demographic of folks where the retro appeals?
Yeah, I would say less than a passing phase, more of the end of an era, as new people come in and they're less romanticized by the old school controls.
I don't think that that's true. Now, here's why I'll say that. When I was selling my Canon gear the end of last year, because I moved into the X system with Fuji, I had a lot of kids coming up that were shooting Fujifilm cameras, and they were really as passionate as the folks kind of my generation, or maybe Gen X folks that also like those cameras. Certainly here in the Bay Area, they've got great mind share and presence. And I saw a lot of kids in their early 20s that I think love the appeal of the design for the same reason that these kids also love tangible prints of photographs. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's a real sensibility of this is why the Instax line is so successful, why they like tangible prints. This is why we're seeing some of these kids shooting film these days and making prints. Yeah. And so it appeals to them as well. So I think that there's certainly a market segment for whom this design, maybe regardless of age, is really appealing. And then there's going to be folks that really want the kind of classic Nikon D series, Canon 1D series experience where you have full electronic control at your fingertips, right? It's fast, fluid, as Jeff was saying, I'm shooting Michael Phelps. I can't worry about what, I need the camera to respond to my fingertip controls as fast as possible. Right? Yeah. There's always, and again, that's fine. Cameras are tools. We've talked about this a lot, Frederick, in terms of best meeting your needs. Mm-hmm. And for me, the Fuji system works. I like the way it works. It seems to appeal to a lot of people in that respect. And I would say that certainly there's younger adults that it appeals to, and then there's another segment, probably Gen X, and baby boomers that it appeals to.
Yeah. So Stephen, you mentioned what you said was really dead on, which is their tools. Yeah. And when I write a blog and say, gee, the EOS R is not going to work for me, and then people are like, oh, you're bashing Canon. No, I'm not. It's a tool. There's certain tools that work well for. There's tools that contractors will use that I'll never use. Yeah. I'll just get the cheaper screwdriver because, frankly, that works for me. And so there's different tools for different levels of those people who are using them. Absolutely. And I think I know people who have the Canon 1DX Mark II and don't really know how to use it. And they have it because they can afford it. Mm-hmm. But it would be like me buying an amazing saw, and I'm not very handy at the house. I try to make money in photography to pay someone else who knows how to do this stuff. Yeah. I don't know. So for me to go out and buy a really good microphone to use, and a damn thing doesn't work today, right? Yeah. Like, times just having the best tool doesn't always work for me. So I'm reverting back to the AirPod. So but it is a tool, and people get enamored with it. And a lot of people love to drop their paychecks at B&H, and we all do this. But the fact of the matter is, it's a tool, and every tool is different for every use. And so, what Stephen's using and Frederick, what you're using is different from what I'm using, but it doesn't make any of them bad. Right.
Absolutely not. And I want to just expand and finish your thought off, Jeff, because when I started shooting with Fujifilm, it was originally with the X Pro 1, that had fairly slow autofocus, and then the XT1. And I was telling Frederick, last week or a couple weeks ago at F64 Live that, I couldn't use the XT1 for my trackside racing action work. It simply did not have the autofocus performance. But I used it everywhere else because rather than carrying it, how big a 1D is, rather than carrying that around pit lane and paddock and doing atmosphere shots at the racetrack, I could carry the little XT1 around, get everything my PR directors needed, much easier on my body physically. And then when I had to hit trackside for actual racing action, I took my 1D Mark IIN out because the XT1 at the time couldn't do the job, know, and things are advancing now. It looks like with the XT3, it's even more than the XT2 and XH1, which are considerable cameras in their own right.
Yeah. And that brings up a really good point, and that's the idea of we as photographers tend to think in, or a lot of us, not all of us, tend to think in ORs, right? And I've said this on the show before, where it's, I got to have this camera or that camera. I have to have this piece of software or that piece of software, this computer or that computer. And Jeff, I'll throw this to you first. In the world of Canon, and now with this new kid on the block, this R, what's the ideal ensemble, right? So if you need the Sherman tank, to get your work done, can't you also have an R in the bag for going out on the town and street photography and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I even do this today with the 1D versus the 5D. I mean, as Stephen mentioned, the 1D is a tank and it's heavy when you're carrying that all over the place. So one of the things I'll do when I'm, I just went up for 3 days with the family just to hang out. I got done shooting, drove up to Sacramento to see the family, going to a little party, and I brought a camera. Never actually used it, but I brought one. I brought a 5D. Why am I going to bring a 1DX if I don't? I'm not going to be shooting at 14 frames a second. Any of my family, because none of them warrant that. Just to be clear, but I mean, no one needs to be photographed at 14 frames a second unless you're doing sports or whatever. So, so I bring a smaller camera. Yes, could I take an EOS R with me with the converter and take or maybe with a 24 to 105? Absolutely. And if I'm on vacation and I'm not going to be shooting professionally, I still and I'm sure you guys are like this too, where you don't want to go with too little gear, because if you get somewhere amazing, you don't want to be just with your iPhone like, oh gosh, this is killing me.
Yeah.
And we've all been there. I'd probably still take a long lens, like a long zoom, like a 100 or 400, and a wide. But yeah, it'd be nice to have a small camera and not have to haul a bigger one. Yeah. And again, in that case, you're right, because if my camera only lasts for 400 shots, if I'm on vacation and if I have 2 batteries, that's fine, right? Yeah. So yeah, I could see it as possibly being in the arsenal, and it might be soon that I have one. Yeah. Because again, I haven't picked it up and played with it yet. So I know that for the Olympics, there's not a chance that would ever be in there. Although, I guess to Stephen's point, for shooting the press shots in the press room, I could maybe. So maybe even that's an overstatement. But I think in general, I'm still looking for more from them with it. But yeah, it could be an arsenal for sure.
Yeah. And Stephen, what about you? So now with this new addition to the Fuji family, how does that shift your ideal of what the ideal Fuji kit would be? It's an XT3 and something else, or what do you think?
So it's a really good question. Of course, I've been asking myself this the last year or so since this was, camera was released. And right now I have an XT2 and an XH1. And they're both, very capable cameras still. I think I'm probably going to wait on the XT3 and not buy that camera right now.
What?
Well, here's why.
That's heresy. Come on.
Well,
you're a photographer. You have endless income.
That's right. So just to put this in perspective, and I'll finish this thought in just a sec, but, I shot with a 1D series body for 13 years, and the same body for a 1D Mark II or 2N for 11 years. And that camera served me well. So I'm not the kind of guy that normally kind of blows through bodies frequently, although I would certainly have more so with the Fujis. But the XH1 is really a really, really good camera. And it's built like a 1D. I wrote a blog article about this on my blog, that it's really, what Fuji's done is modeled its lines very similarly after Canon's, where the XT series is very much like a 5D class of camera, and the XH1 is very much like a 1D series of camera. And having used both types of cameras extensively, I think that's a pretty good description of the purpose of the use case for those cameras. Mm-hmm. So what I'm really interested in is potentially the XH2, because I see the XH1 as very much a tough, reliable, durable workhorse camera. I like the top sub monitor on the top when I'm using it in a professional context. A lot of people gripe about mixing the comp dial on the XH1 that's on the XT2 and now the XT3. I'll tell you, I was shooting a shoot at the racetrack, and I was bumping the comp dial all day long, and my exposures were off because I was hitting it, getting it out of a little Kawasaki mule running around the racetrack.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, what I'm really excited about is when the XH2 hits the market. That's probably going to be when I'm going to switch out, and it will have all the features and functionality of the XT3, but it'll have the build quality and the camera frame of an XH1, which is kind of like 1D class build quality. Yeah. So it's going to be reliable and durable. And I think Jeff can agree with me that our probably top 3 requirements for a professional use case are durability, reliability, shutter life, and battery life. Those are probably our top 4 requirements.
Yeah, and of course image quality. Yeah,
image quality, of course. That kind of, you get that everywhere nowadays, right? That's kind of
that's true.
Yeah.
You know,
But when you guys think about that though, I'm sorry, Jeff, when you guys think about the like all the specs and the hardware that Stephen's talking about, and Jeff, your requirements, shooting the Olympics and events and all that stuff. When and this is a question that I posed to the Nikon guys too, right after the Z announcement. When is the era of the DSLR ending? Or is it ending? Is it? And this is a pointed question. I'm very serious. Is mirrorless going? I mean, all arrows point to mirrorless being the technology of the future in terms of imaging and image making. Is that the truth? Because I'm hearing no, because there are certain things where DSLRs excel at, and those things aren't necessarily going away. And I don't know if they're solvable. Jeff, I'll let you take it first. What do you think? Is the DSLR dead, or is it just?
I don't. It's not dead. Then again, you know, if you talk to Eastman Kodak, you know, 15, 20 years ago, they're like, film's not dead. I'm like, it's dead. I mean, you know, so we have to be careful here. DSLRs are not dead today, for sure. You know, for the same reason that I said today on the blog, I'm not switching to mirrorless yet because my DSLRs do something that it doesn't.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, do I think that mirrorless is the future? I actually do think that what we're using today, I mean, if you think about the shutter and the camera, it hasn't changed in bazillion years, right? So it is time for them, because of the way technology has evolved and the cameras have not, it is time to take a fresh look. And I think that that's where we're going. And I think, I've told people a story in the past where they tried to create a machine to pick tomatoes in the old days over and over and could not make the machine to pick tomatoes without squishing them until someone just said, well, let's just redesign the tomato, right? So they rehybrided the tomato to pick it green with thick skin. They taste like crap, but whatever. But the point is, they took a different look at it. And I think that's what's happening right now with cameras, is they're finally saying, okay, the DSLR has done really well. As Stephen said, it worked for him for many, many years on the track. Yeah. So now the question is, how do you take the old school and move it to more? And I think that's what Sony has kind of done. Is Sony has woken everybody up to say mirrorless is real. It can do things that the shuttered cameras cannot do. And now I think this is why I'm saying, I think Canon and Nikon now will take what they have in their knowledge and say, we're going to take that knowledge, add it into the mirrorless space, and we're going to create a real pro. And this is what I'm hoping for, is that, in the next year to 18 months before the Tokyo Olympics, the Canon goes, guess what? Everything you asked for in the blog, here it is. Yeah. It is the holy grail of mirrorless, which has all of these things built in. And I think that whether it's Tokyo Olympics or Beijing Winter Olympics, whatever, it's coming. I do believe it's coming.
Yeah, Stephen, what about you? Is it DSLR gone?
I would say that there is a large enough installed base of professional DSLR users like Jeff. I've been watching the U.S. Open the last 10 days or so, right? And pretty much every camera in there is either a Canon or a Nikon professional D series or 1D series body, for good reason. For me, I would say that with the advent of the XT2, my needs for a DSLR, and I pushed the systems pretty hard, were obviated by the Fujis. So I can do everything I used to do with the DSLR with the Fuji cameras, and my back is very appreciative of that fact. And I think the XT3 is going to raise that bar even higher. So there would be more professionals migrating. And certainly I hope with the XH2, that would be, an even higher level of build quality along with that extra functionality. But the bottom line is that there's a very large installed base, particularly among professionals, of Canon and Nikon users that are shooting DSLRs today. And I think what Jeff has been saying very accurately is that those cameras have to evolve as tools to meet their professional requirements before they'll fully migrate over. And I see it happening. Mm-hmm. It's just that I think that Canon and Nikon typically have longer R&D development times historically.
Or prehistorically,
Or prehistorically, for whatever reason, right? They certainly don't, do design by rapid prototyping in a way that the way Sony does.
Yeah.
Right. I would say Fuji's in between. Fuji's kind of on a 2-year development cycle, right? And they put meaningful changes into their cameras that make them significantly better. From all appearances, the XT3 is from what I've read, a pretty significant jump over the XT2, which was a big jump over the XT1. And so I see, Frederick, you and I talked about this at TWiP Pro a little bit, that I think these are entry points for mirrorless for Canon and Nikon, and I'm sure that they've got development plans underway to extend the functionality of these cameras into the professional realm.
Yeah,
they're going on right now.
Yeah,
right?
these cameras seem very much like tourniquets, for the blood loss that was going over to Sony, right? So, and if they are tourniquets, and the feed over to Sony of users, the exodus going over to Sony for people that want full frame mirrorless, does this mean Sony is going to flatline now, or at least take a dip as these larger companies or these other companies take back their market share? What do you guys think?
Well, sorry.
Go ahead, Stephen.
I think that they are going to definitely have an impact on the market share. The installed base of users is too large for them not to. I think one example would be folks that now want to shoot video, that can shoot video on the Canon. That adapter that they have where you can drop in the ND filter is a stroke of genius.
Yeah. Right,
because you only need one filter for all of your lenses now, rather than having to buy different sized filters for all of your EOS lenses.
Imagine that. Right? Put it in the back and not in the front. Imagine that.
Put it in the back and not in the front. It was really a stroke of genius. It was really smart on their part to do that. And so now you've got guys that can shoot 4K 10-bit video on the EOS R and use their entire portfolio of EOS lenses for those applications. And so I would say that I would predict that 2 to 3 years out from now, that Sony's market share is going to be is going to take a double-digit hit from Canon and Nikon. And the other, they're big in full frame right now, but the real market, and I expect Canon and Nikon both will be releasing models, is APS-C, is still, when you look at total sales volume, still outsells full frame by 8 or 9 to 1 in terms of total number of buyers.
Yeah, Jeff, what say you, man? Is it time for the Sony people to have buyer's remorse?
No, I mean, again, they're tools, and if the tools work for them, that's great. I don't think there's remorse in having a good camera. I mean, and I've said that the Sonys are fine cameras. I mean, it's been the Canon, Nikon. As I always tell people always ask me, which one's better? Well, I've been using Canon my life. I work with the people at Canon. I know them well. But, if you ask the BMW driver which one's better, BMW or Mercedes, he's going to say BMW. You ask the Mercedes driver, he's going to say Mercedes. But the fact of the matter is, they're all good cameras. Like Stephen said, I think that there will be a hit to Sony's market share. I don't know if these cameras, specifically the Z from Nikon and the R from Canon, are going to be, the killers necessarily, but I think what it does is I think it plants a stake and says they're coming, right? And so don't, if you've got lenses, don't jettison your lenses yet. And if you like the Canon user interface or the Nikon user interface and you don't want to jump to something else, I think that it's the message that's the important thing more than the camera itself. Yeah, really. Yeah. But yes, I think Sony should be worried. Because they've had a little bit of time to get cocky and go, hey, look what we've done. And I think people are starting to like, uh-oh, here it comes. And they had to know it was coming because Canon and Nikon are not going to rest on their laurels. And so it's going to be really interesting over the next 2 to 4 years to see what does Canon, what does Nikon, what do those two companies do to.
Yeah, and I don't even feel like that this is not going to take that long. I mean, we're not even at Photo Plus Expo yet. we're seeing all this craziness happen in the space. What happens when everyone else comes out with something or nothing? Whether people come out with something or nothing will still be telling for the industry. The whole thing is really interesting. Hey, I want to remind the folks that are watching live to give us a thumbs up. Even if you're not watching live, give the video a thumbs up. That helps us get noticed on YouTube. And also, if you are watching live and you're in the chat room, throw a question or two in there for the guys if you want us to answer them, and we'll get those to them right after this next segment, which is going to be the picks of the week. So I want to go for it, Steve.
I just want to finish up Jeff's thought. I would predict, I'll go on a limb and predict that you will see a big push for a much more professionally designed mirrorless body, both from Nikon and Canon, for the 2020 Olympics. that's where I think they're going to reveal those cameras and make a big push into mirrorless. And I would expect that's about the right amount of time they would need to do their R&D and their product development. You can bet that development's going on now. You can bet that that's on their radar. And I would expect that we would see those 1D and D series mirrorless equivalents make their debut at the 2020 Olympics.
Yeah,
exactly. And we should also say that, even though I work closely with Canon has not said to me in any shape or form, here's what we're doing. So it's not like I'm telling trade secrets. I'm guessing as much as anybody else, but I do know, I think, and Stephen knows, and that the Olympics, at least for Canon and Nikon, has always been, that's when they dropped the D3, the D4, the D5. It's when Canon has made their changes on the professional side. So
absolutely.
I think that, and it's always been Summer Olympics, which is interesting. It's never really been winter. Always been the 4-year cycle based on the Summer Games. So I keep talking about 2020 in Tokyo. That's because I'm going off history, but I don't know anything, and we can just hope.
Yeah, we can all see patterns, right, and then make inferences based on those patterns. Well, Jeff, I'll let you have
something's coming, whether it's mirrorless or not. Something is coming from both of them, for sure.
Winter is coming. No. So, Jeff, I'm going to let you get the last word on the Canon side. Obviously, to the folks that are watching this and participating in the chat room, etc. In the vein of Canon finally making moves in the mirrorless space, what are some final thoughts from you on that?
Like I said before, I'm just happy they're here. They're in the game. Again, in conversations with my friends at Canon I've had over the last couple of years, been like, come on, guys, where is this full frame mirrorless? And so the fact that they made the big push in Hawaii that they did this week, again, you know how expensive that is, right? It's not just the Canon release or the camera release; it's what they're doing behind it. I think it's like, okay, good. They're in the race. Again, I wasn't expecting the replacement of the 1D, so it's kind of what I expected it to be. And in some cases, it surpassed it. I really love what they've done with the control ring and the filters and some other things. They've done some really cool stuff. One thing we didn't talk about is the communication, the change of the lens mount, which, again, now we're getting really technical, but that's something that we haven't talked about. But there's a lot more technology and communications now between the camera and lens that by legacy has not been there. That's going to allow them to do much faster autofocus and God knows what. But I think that it's like, it is the next step. It's not just an evolution of the 1D or 5D. It's kind of a revolution. And okay, now and I'm not saying that they're revolutionary compared to Sony, right? I'm saying Canon is now into the game. Right, and so that's what's exciting, and the fact that they're stepping in and saying, "Here we come," no different than Nikon. And I think Canon and Nikon need each other, right, against Sony. And I think both of them come in and said, "Guess what? Here's our stake. Here's our stake. We're coming at you." And I think that's good. It's good for the industry.
Yeah. I think it's good for photographers overall. Yeah. Well, we'll see if it's good for consumers overall. Stephen, what about you? Any final words on the Fuji?
I would say that there's already been with the XT2 a pretty significant migration of professionals, starting to use XT2 and XH1s from other camera brands. They love the color science, they love the skin tones, they love the stuff, those intangibles we talked about. But I would say that we're going to see a pretty significant migration of video professionals starting to adopt the XT3. That camera's got serious video capabilities that pretty much are very comparable to the GH5, but on a larger sensor, fully functional in terms of video performance. Jordan Drake did a little 5-minute video yesterday comparing them, and he was very pleased. The camera looks to have better autofocus performance than the GH5. So I would expect that we're going to see significant adoption by the XT3 by professional video users and makers, and with the MK series of Cine lenses that Fuji's releasing, that market share is going to grow for them.
Love it. All right, guys. Well, thanks for that. I feel a little bit more educated on on the topic. But with these new cameras that keep coming out, they're adding more and more confusion, which, Stephen, as you and I talked about a couple days ago, results in analysis paralysis, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I guess, your bank account is like, thank you. I'm glad the paralysis is there. But guys, we're going to move on to the picks of the week segment. I want to remind the folks, if you do have questions for us, go ahead and put them in the chat. Our community manager, Christopher Berry, is well rested. He's just back from Burning Man, and he's in there collating the questions and putting them in our Google Doc for us to answer. So if you have a question, go ahead and post them in there. The Picks of the Week segment is next. This is the segment where you guys get to recommend something to the TWiP audience as long as it is somehow related to photography. Stephen Scharf, you've never been on the show ever. I'm going to let you go first. What is your pick of the week, sir?
My pick of the week is PhotoLemur 3. Frederick, you did a little spiel about PhotoLemur a couple of months ago when it first debuted.
Yeah.
It's an inexpensive little application that uses artificial intelligence to very quickly go through and do fixes to your photographs in Lightroom or Photoshop. And as you have some experience, Frederick, with PhotoLemur, it's very smart about what it does. They just announced PhotoLemur 3 a couple days ago. There's a pre-order discount right now for folks that don't have it. You can buy it for only $35. Existing license holders can upgrade for $15. And it works seamlessly as a plug-in within Lightroom and Photoshop. And it's pretty dang sweet little way to very quickly and seamlessly improve the look of your pictures. Yeah. So that's my pick.
I love it. PhotoLemur, yeah, they use artificial intelligence to look at the image, and then they make exposure and color balance decisions based on AI, which is kind of cool, Which it is, and they just improved the face and skin detection part of that AI with this new release. Love it, love it. I'll have to play with that. Cool. Well, thank you. That's your first pick, Stephen. How's it feel? You're
pretty good. And I'm going to have to download the new rev of PhotoLemur.
There you go. All right, Jeff Cable, man. What is your pick of the week?
I'll tell you what. I'm going to go with two smaller accessories for photography and I'm just thinking this through here that it really helps. So a couple things. Batteries, people just take them for granted. Yep. I use the PowerEx batteries, these little guys.
What is that? PowerEx?
Yeah, by Maha.
Okay.
And this thing, these things rock. 2,700 milliamps, and literally when I shoot an event, I put a set of these in a flash, like a remote flash. It's like on a 12-foot stand, and I don't change them for 4 hours. And I'm shooting the living daylights out. So I love these things, and the Maha chargers are phenomenal. I mean, literally charge a set in an hour versus like my old chargers, which took overnight. So I'm gonna have to go with that, and then I'll do another one, which is memory cards, which, as you know, I spend a lot of time in Lexar. Yep. But the guys left Lexar, the execs, and went to ProGrade Digital, which is this guy, and I'm using their cards and readers. And I know this sounds really weird, but the reader, which is sitting right here, and I'll grab it. The readers have a magnet on the bottom. So this is a CFast to SD combination reader, but it's magnetized. So I have a little plate that's on my laptop, so I can stick it right to the laptop. I actually have it stuck right here to my Drobo as well. So you can stick them to each other, magnetized. So as Ken knows, when you're shooting sports, you generally have a reader connected to your laptop. It's really cool to have them stick on. Like silly little stuff that makes a huge difference.
What? That sounds cool, but that, for some reason, magnets and data.
Yeah, solid state. I know, but there's nothing in here that moves. So has not been an issue. But it's something. It does sound scary, but it's not.
It's not? Okay. All right.
Hey Jeff, are those PowerEx batteries better than the N loops?
I've used the N loop. I've used the N loop Pro and these pack a little bit more punch than the N loop Pro does. But even, the reason I found these guys actually is I was using the N-loop batteries, and I couldn't get a good charger. So I actually found the Maha charger, and I'm going to break the rules and show you a prototype of their charger, because they actually sent me one, and it's unannounced, but I'll just tick them off anyway. But this is their charger. It looks similar to the other one, except it's got a better LCD on it, but I won't tell too much more. But this thing will charge these batteries in no time, and great. It's wicked. Like cool, like for someone like me that's charging 8 to 10 sets of batteries a week, if not more. Yeah, be able to charge them really quickly, and you can also condition the batteries, and it tells you exactly like how many milliamps are left, like what state your batteries are in.
Yep,
is really really cool.
See, those kinds of endorsements. Those kinds of endorsements are the true critical endorsements, because both of you guys are in the trenches using this stuff and trying to find the path of least resistance to get your stuff done, right? So when you recommend a piece of gear, it's not because, hey, I just found this and I'm going to try it out. It's because you're trying to make your life easier and the craft easier, right?
It's all about the tools. As kids, they're tools, right? I mean, to me, it's like, I don't care how pretty they look. Do they work? And I've got I should create a little blog about this. The stuff that's under $100 that really works well. Yeah. Mag Mod on top of your flash. Yeah. It's cheap. It works great. I love that thing. Manfrotto makes an arm. I don't know if you've seen this, a magnetic support arm. Yeah. Because every time I'd hang a backdrop up, I wanted to just kill somebody because the clips would never work. The thing would fall. Just pop up. I just used it this afternoon shooting headshots. I was like, stick it up. I'm like,
Jeff, you got to write a blog. So, and I want to do a pick of the week, and that's got to be your blog, Jeff. So your blog is awesome. And I was hoping you were going to mention it more, but you should tell people about your blog. And it is a highly trafficked blog, and it is well written. It's well designed. It's all about photography and other stuff. So give us a 30-second elevator pitch on your blog and where people can go to check it out.
Yeah, so it's just blog.jeffcable.com. It started as for friends and family to tell them where the heck I was. Started Beijing Olympics in '08 and just has grown since then. And it really is about what I'm shooting, how I'm shooting it. I don't hold anything back. I put camera settings in there. I try to talk from the heart, like I said today on the EOS R. I try to give them the real world. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I don't allow advertising on the blog because I want to be able to speak the truth. But it's a lot about just sharing the passion of photography. I mean, if I can encapsulate it in one sentence, it is I love photography, whether it's motorsports, the Olympics, bar mitzvah, wedding, African wildlife, whatever it is. I love it. And so the blog is not just one thing. It's basically all of photography and just trying to share the love of that with everybody. And I take people's suggestions. I answer every email. I don't charge for it. I do it strictly for the passion of it. And that's what it's about.
I love it. The way I describe it to people, it is your personal journey through photography from a candid sort of, slant versus, like you said, marketing or endorsed or whatever. It's just like, hey, like you were talking about when you were at the Olympics and, you somehow lost your badge and the adventure. The adventure of getting an Olympic pass, which is like gold,
losing your credentials. That's tough.
So the other thing I want to add, which is really important to me, is I keep it very positive. Yeah. And I think that I don't talk about politics. I don't talk about, things that are really, I think, sensitive. I want to keep it about photography and things. I think that there's too much out there that goes and tries to use it as a platform, and I don't want it to be that. Yeah. And I want people to stay positive. And the one thing I will say about the readers that is amazing to me is that they are positive, and you don't see the bashing. And I won't name some of the sites that are out there, but you guys all read them. And man, people just trash on photographers or their art, and I'm really happy to say that my blog is not like that, and I try to promote that, and I just want to throw that out there.
I'll just throw out that the TWiP PRO community is very much as you describe as well, Jeff, which is why it's such a great place to hang out, because there's none of that bashing. There's just mature, courteous, considerate interaction and engagement, which is great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, cool. All right. Well, guys, it is time to move into the Q&A segment. You guys ready to take some questions?
Sure.
All right. Let's do it. First question up. And thank you, Chris Berry, for doing this, despite the sand that's probably in your keyboard from Burning Man. So the first one's from Janet Robinson. And Janet says, how does the Canon full-frame mirrorless compare to Nikon's? That's a loaded question because no one has held either one on this panel, so you guys can only speculate. So feel free to speculate on Canon versus Nikon full frame. Crickets. Yeah, you can't really answer that.
You know, I mean, I don't know if we could answer it. I think to your point, and I tell people this all the time when people say, "What do you think of this lens?" And I go, "I haven't shot with it yet." And I'd rather. It's hard to answer that without, because Ken was talking about the A9 and how, as I mentioned, in spec it sounded amazing, and then he picked it up, it was like his hands weren't working well with it, and so I think it's too early to tell. I think they have a lot of similarities in that they're entering the market, they're doing things with full frame, they're doing some cool stuff with focal points and the speed of focus on it. But until you have them in your hand, I think it's just too early to say, honestly.
Yeah.
My advice is to rent cameras that you're interested in buying and see what works for you.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like what Troy Miller says, Frederick, right? You know, put all the cameras you're interested in buying up on the counter at the camera store, right? And whichever one fits your hand the best, buy that camera. You know, he says
that's one way to do it.
Yeah. You know.
All right, cool. All right, next question is from Janet Robinson. This is another one I think that's kind of unanswerable, but you guys take a shot at it. It says, she says, what are your thoughts on the rumors that Panasonic is also releasing a full frame soon? We don't know, right?
Probably.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows?
Everybody else has.
Yeah. Who knows? All right, so...
I think what it's going to do, it's going to make, full frame is, if you read the book Blue Ocean Strategy, which is about innovation, it's a really great book on innovation. The whole premise of Blue Ocean Strategy is to stay out of red oceans where there's lots of sharks and the water is bloody from sharks. And full frame has got a lot of buzz right now, justifiably. It's kind of like the area where everybody wants to be because it's kind of the ideal, intellectually speaking or theoretically speaking, sensor size. I don't fully buy into that, but regardless of that, but it's a red ocean. And with Canon and Nikon's advent into that marketplace with Sony, the ocean just got a lot redder because they're going to come hard for Sony and start to take market share. Panasonic's now getting into that red ocean as well. And so you're going to have 4 entrants minimally, all competing for the same share of the pie. And they're all going to have to be able to differentiate and innovate in ways that meet their customer needs in a unique way to be able to take significant market share. Yeah,
which means in the end, regardless of who announces what, the competition pushes everyone higher, right?
Yeah.
Like the pressure of having 2 memory card slots, which we talked about on TWiP PRO a fair amount.
Right.
And my thoughts on that whole issue / debacle, whatever you want to talk about, however you want to position it, is that you got to start somewhere. And looking at the sort of, if you envision the evolution of man chart in, say, Nikon's headquarters, you're at the far left right now, right? So who knows what the far right's going to be? And they have to start somewhere, and they have to leave. They're not going to release the ultimate camera, and not have any place to grow into. You got to start with a large pot and a small ceiling in there. And
earlier I said, Canon and Nikon need each other.
Yeah.
To kind of compete against, Sony. And I think that the competition it helps everybody, because without the competition, then they can just rest on their laurels and create a subpar product and people have to just deal with it.
Yeah. Love it. All right, let's move on to the next question, folks. The next one is from WorkPix. WorkPix says, what are your thoughts on third-party lens manufacturers dealing with the new R mount?
Well, I think, like they're addressing other mounts. It's probably no different. I think that what they're going to want to do is they're going to assess the market, and if the R mount becomes really popular, they're going to dive right in.
Yeah. Of course. I mean, it's a market thing. If there's money, like Stephen says, if the water's red,
exactly.
There'll be sharks in there. Jim Thrall says, is Canon's mirrorless ready for action sports? Yeah, see that look right there, Jeff, says it all.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing. If it's action sports, if it's your kid's soccer game or something, I think fine. 8 frames a second is fine. Again, you're limited to 400 shots for a battery. That could be a bit limiting. I think for what Ken and I are doing, probably not. For the amateur photographer who doesn't take 400 pictures, per hour like we do, it might be fine. I think it's a usable camera for sure. It just depends on, you have to define what you're doing. For a professional sports photographer, no, not yet.
Right. I agree with that. All right, here's one for you, Stephen. It's from
Sure.
Ruth Happel. She says, will more cameras pick up on the pre-record function just introduced in the XT3, also known as Pro Capture with Olympus? It's really helpful for wildlife photography. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they will. I certainly think that we're going to see that functionality cascade probably to the XT20 or the XT30 when that camera debuts, which it will probably within 8 to 10 months. And I would start to see it, certainly on an XH2. I think Panasonic, Frederick, has that feature with the G9 and the GH5, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And so Fuji clearly took a page from Panasonic's book with respect to that. It's clearly a great feature, and I expect that it will start to become maybe a must-have functionality over time as manufacturers start to kind of cascade out the functionality that they can implement on these on the sensors for these cameras.
Yeah, good. What an exciting time. We've got one more question here, Stephen. I'm going to throw this one to you since this was your pick. Janet Robinson says, does PhotoLemur software work with Luminar?
Yes, it does. I don't know that it plugs into Luminar, but actually PhotoLemur was bought by Skylum and is now owned by Skylum. So I would say that the two work hand in hand. What I don't know is if PhotoLemur works as a plugin within Luminar. I haven't actually tried it that way because I actually use both Luminar and PhotoLemur as plugins within Lightroom.
Okay.
So I don't really use Luminar as a standalone app. It's certainly, and again, I just wrote to the PhotoLemur folks today about if there was a discount. They got back to me literally within 24 hours. So I would suggest, if you think that's a great feature, those guys who are incredibly responsive to customer input. As you know, Frederick, Scott Bourne is the vice president of development for North America for Skylum. Mm-hmm. Those guys are very open to feature requests, and they get back to you generally within a day or so if you throw in a feature request.
Yep, very good. All right, guys, look at that. See how fast these episodes go? It's done and in the can already. Jeff, we already talked about blog.jeffcable.com. So yeah, definitely folks should go over there and subscribe and check out your stuff. If they want to follow you otherwise, where should they go to stalk you?
Instagram is just Jeff Cable Photography, as is Facebook. Twitter, jcable12. I don't know why. Picked it years ago. Really, most of it's just Instagram is probably the one that I tend to be active on. Well, I try to be active on all of them, but just Jeff Cable Photography. No spaces.
Love it.
Easy.
Cool. And thank you for coming on, man. Yeah, it's a pleasure having you on. You always add value to the conversation.
Well, we'll see if we can do it again next week.
Absolutely. We will do it again next week. All right. And Stephen, what about you, man? If people want to follow you and see some of that fantastic motorsport stuff that you do or
sure,
molecular biology. If they want their DNA sequenced, where should they go?
So they can reach me on Instagram at racing_the_light. My website is www.stephenscharf.com. And then my email is sgsphoto@earthlink.net.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thanks, guys. Thank you for coming on. Stephen, thanks for coming on. And thank you for being a member of the TWiP Pro community. You're fantastic in there and continue to add value every single day. So I appreciate you being in there and being so active. So
well, thanks for the invite today. Appreciate it.
No, absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Always good to see you. Ken, good to see you virtually.
I know. I haven't seen you in years, but we've seen each other like this for several times. All right, folks that are watching, listening, subscribed, and otherwise consuming this content, remember you can keep up with all things This Week in Photo over at thisweekinphoto.com. And if you want to subscribe to this podcast, just go to thisweekinphoto.com/subscribe, and you can subscribe to us on Stitcher, on with all these services. Anything you can think of, we're there. iTunes, Stitcher, what are the other ones? I don't know. I can't even think of them. But the entire list of places where you can consume media, we are present. Google Podcasts, everywhere. But please do that. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can also like and subscribe to us. I'd appreciate that so that you get notified when we release these new episodes. And that's it, guys. It is time to take that lens cap off.
This is TWiP.